Welcome to Marlowe House Presents Insights and Inspiration. I'm Andrew Marlowe, and again, I'm here all alone. So it's a little weird talking into the basement and into the ether, as it were. So hello, everybody. Um, so today is the Tuesday, the Tuesday that a brand new blog comes up for me for No Direction. So if you want to pop on over there, you can see what I wrote this week. It is about crowdsourcing your lost my train of thought. Crowdsourcing your campaign setting and your world building. So getting your players involved in doing a little bit of the world building. And if you've been watching any of our streams, you know that's not something we're particularly strangers to around here. Scoundrels of a Stranger Sky was all crowdsourced, brainstormed, live on air, and then we ran with it. And now we're going to be starting Legends of the Wild Wastes, which is much the same kind of thing. We're going to be doing, we did our brainstorming, and we came up with fantasy Wild West mechs powered by alchemy. So this should be interesting, and we're looking forward to getting that started here in the near future on Friday nights. So check back with us. Speaking about things that are coming up in the near future, looking into my crystal ball at tomorrow, we're going to be on the Cypher Unlimited podcast as guests. Monica and I will both be there answering questions, and who knows what we're going to do. It'll be interesting. We are looking forward to that a great deal. If you are interested, their Twitch is in the chat window as we speak. So we are looking forward to that. So that is coming up tomorrow. I don't know exactly what that's going to pertain. They said they've got some questions for us, and we're I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, we're excited to be going on, and I'm kind of rambling. So we're gonna move on. Other things that are coming up in the near future. If you were watching on Friday hoping to see Nick Logue, you know it did not happen. Bad technology. Which, as luck would have it, I fired everything up today, and if we had had Nick on this afternoon, it would have worked perfectly. Everything ran like a champ. I have no idea what went wrong on Friday. So I need to figure that out so it doesn't repeat. But we will be getting Nick back at some point. He and I need to coordinate exactly when that will be. Hopefully his throat issues will be cleared up, and our technology will work, and everything will be hunky-dory. Speaking of things along those lines, we do have another guest coming up. If my calendar is, if my memory is serving me correctly for the calendar, and I did not put it in this calendar. We should be having Sean K. Reynolds next week. We've got a event posted on Facebook for that. So by all means, go check that out and sign up. Let us know if you're coming, if you're interested in coming, or just show up here on the Twitch and see Sean K. Reynolds answer some of our questions. Speaking of questions for Sean K. Reynolds, if you have questions, you can send them to our Discord. I put the link in the chat box for that as well. Or you can pop over to Marlowe House on Facebook, and you can link us there. Or if you know Monica or myself and you have our Facebook accounts, you can send them to us directly via Facebook. So there are lots of easy ways to get a hold of us. By all means, if you've got questions for Sean, whether it's about Cypher System, whether it's about his time at Pathfinder, if it's about 5 Moons or anything else, just let us know, and we'll put it in the hopper and see what we can have time to ask. So, all of that said, I thought I would ask you guys a question tonight and see where that went to start with. I do have a topic if that doesn't go anywhere, but I'm just curious, what are you guys playing these days? What's everybody doing? What's the most recent things you guys have been playing? Anybody? Well, all right. So, no takers on that. So, we're going to head into our discussion topic for tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about side scenes. It's something I'd like to do. Something I'd like to do more of in our. Yeah, Monica, you're doing Cypher. I know. But thank you. So, side scenes. Something I'd like to do more of in the games that I run. We used to do a lot of it. I know. I just realized that you guys are seriously delayed. I wasn't thinking about that. I didn't have enough to chat about while I waited for answers. So if they start shooting in, that's cool. We used to do a lot of side scenes back in the days when we would LARP. We had a lot of what they would do would be downtime scenes, and you'd write them up and you'd send them via email, or because our organization was freaking we just aren't part of it anymore. The organization we used to play with is enormous, and it is multinational, and there are players all across the country, in other countries, on other continents. It's enormous. And so a lot of times we would have scenes with people we couldn't meet up with in person, realistically, but vampires are loaded to the gills with money frequently, and people can just hop a plane and go places what the players can't do. So a lot of downtime scenes were had online, and it's something that could be added into a tabletop game pretty easily. Invisible Sun actually worked it into the mechanics of the game, but you don't actually have to have it in the mechanics necessarily to do it. Listening to the Glass Cannon guys, you can hear them. If you listen to their show, they'll do side scenes, and I think I'm not coming from a point of any sort of experience on this, but from having listened, other than having listened to it, but from having listened to it, I think the players write up a lot of those side scenes, and Troy kind of takes them and works them into the story, and then occasionally they break into dialogue between the two, and then occasionally that dialogue is like improv on the spot, expanded on and improv. And there was one occasion where they went off script in such a way that it actually impressed the other players, that they drew attention to it, which is kind of where my experience with that comes from, is having listened and going, so that's what they're doing. But we could be doing that at our own tables. We could be doing the same kinds of things where you write down what it is that you're doing between games, you email it to your storyteller, your GM, you IM them, you can have a conversation on Instant Messenger or whatever. And hey, how you doing, Justin? But all those things can be rolled into that sort of immediate experience, and I keep getting myself derailed by not one of these days I'm going to get better at this. I promise it'll get better. it is just kind of hard to keep talking to an empty room. I mean, I know you guys are out there listening, but I don't see faces. I have just this one camera and the text box, and periodically I look down at the text box, and it really just, my entire train of thought gets derailed. It is something I am working on. Bear with me. It will get better. But of course, I think that's part of what you guys tune in for, is the actually, like, the interaction. So, I mean, I could be recording the same kinds of things to an empty room with nobody watching, and have nobody reacting, and do that. But I don't think that's as useful. Maybe there's a ton of people that are doing that, and I don't know. My current opinion, it might change, but I'm going to keep doing this show because I'm enjoying it. It's not easy, but I'm enjoying it. Topic tonight, Justin, is side scenes. Things that we can, borrowing ideas from other podcasts, from television, from other games, to bring in flashbacks, nightmares, stuff that stuff that fills out the story, fills out the narrative, gives you something to really kind of attach yourself to the characters with, and something that lets you actually, as players, connect with each other, even if you don't necessarily know what happened. As players, you can connect with the other player characters at the table, just by having those experiences shared at the table, or by having the added depth. If it's just something that's going to be done off camera, it's something that allows you to attach yourself deeper to your character, things that you might remember. And I also kind of want to bring in, while we're talking about a lot of this, I'm going to bring in some of the aspects from my blog today, because there are certain things that I was writing about and I realized would tie into the same topic. So that's kind of what we're discussing tonight. And I started off by talking about where we started doing side scenes was like blue booking with Vampire, and kind of going from there. If you're having a side scene with one of your players, you should, if you're sitting down someplace and you're actually talking about it, and it's not one that's being held in chat or something like that, take notes. Keep notes handy so that everybody can be on the same page. And before you pack it in after the scene, just kind of, what do you think you got out of this? What do you think the important things are that we, to run forward, so everybody's on the same page, because you want to make sure you're on the same page. If you've got a long thread, an email to go back and reference, that's great, but sometimes that face-to-face is better. But if you don't have that point of reference, something jotted down, if both parties don't have something jotted down, you might not remember it exactly the same way, and you might have gotten different things out of the scene, and that can be a surprise at the table for somebody, and you may not want to do that. So I do recommend, if you're going to have side scenes, everybody should have at least notes at the end. If once you finish up and say, well, what do you think the important parts were, and just kind of bullet point what you did, just so that everybody's on the same page. So that when you go back to reference that in 6 months, 8 months, when it becomes relevant again, that everybody remembers it the same way. Now, for the record and full disclosure, I am terrible about taking notes. One of our players is forever looking at her notes going, and so there are things that I have forgotten through the course of our games, that, again, one of those things, everybody's always working to get better. That's one of my things, is I'm working at figuring out ways, because taking notes while I play isn't really very easy as a GM. I have enough other things going on. If I've got a pre-prep module like the adventure paths or something, it's a lot easier, because then it's all there already in print, and I can just make small notations and stick those in the book, like on bookmarks, and go from there. But it's not It's not always the case. Right now I'm running a what was supposed to be a filler game that is expanded and launched itself into a very long-term game with lots of subplots and weird things that have happened, and a lot of the things that I wish I had done differently note-wise. But that's a sidetrack. We're talking side scenes, not sidetracks, and I'm sidetracking myself. So yeah, take notes for your side scenes. Have those handy because it is useful to go off the notes later. And if you're doing things like that, you can bring them back into game. If you've taken your notes, you've got good notes. As a GM, you can remind the player, and you can kind of replay those scenes when it becomes important. You can also do that if the player wants to just write up, this is what, I think my character really would have had a bad time with the experiences this last couple weeks. I would have these nightmares, and they write up some nightmares for you. Well, maybe you use those nightmares in game, and you show them having the nightmares, and you actually play through it and let them have those nightmares so that the other player characters can see it. And maybe all they see is him like tossing and turning, but as players, they're aware of the fact that these nightmares are deeper, they're more effective, they're more personally affecting the person directly. Yeah, that's one of the things I was talking about too, Justin. The idea of being able to do it over Messenger. I really like the ability to do things like that. I have a couple of I haven't gotten as many IMs and emails and texts from my players as I am in the current game that I'm running, and we're still not really doing scenes. And I would like to get into that. I think with some future games, I want to do some more scenes. That's why I've been thinking about it. And since I'm thinking about it and taking notes and trying to figure out how I'm going to do it, I figured I would share my process with you guys. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. I will keep that in mind for myself. I'm gonna steal that from you, probably, Justin, because that's a good idea. Ending things for those people who aren't reading the Twitch feed, ending things so that you can jump into a side scene or role play with everybody between sessions in Messenger can be a useful tool. It's the same kind of thing we're talking about, and it's not a bad idea. I really think it's a good idea, and it's something I may try to implement at least occasionally with the games that I'm looking to run in the near future. Because I'm definitely looking at we are in the middle of wrapping up the current one, and we're gonna go play in the last remnants of Council of Thieves. And then I've got some ideas for some short games I'd like to run, and I would like to really get into for these short games. I'd really like to try to get into some character development and see how much character development we can get crammed into a shorter story, or rather than trying to rely on the long arcs to do the character development just by utilizing things like the side scenes and stuff. Yep, I do too. That's why I'm really glad that you dropped that right into chat, because it was a great idea, and I'm like I said, I'm going to use it. I like being able to listen to other people's ideas, and that's part of why I'm doing the stream here, is so that we can kind of share ideas. So having listened to the Glass Cannon for a while now, and I'm listening to their Androids and Aliens too. They make really good use of side scenes, but they're done for radio. And so it's usually they're cut, he's like he'll cut to some Troy will say something like, and we focus in on, somebody's face, and then we start thinking, we go really close, and sometimes he'll talk about going into like so that you go like you're following a camera and it'll go into their eye, and then from the black of their eye it'll become like the black of space, and then it'll approach on a ship, and it's very cinematic, and it's a good way to kind of start one of those scenes, but it doesn't translate necessarily to table play because again they've written some of this stuff up in advance and he works it in the timely place as far as I can tell. I mean, he might just be throwing stuff out there in some cases where it's just entirely him. I don't even know. But I don't want to make my players feel like they have to write up stuff. I'd love to get stuff written up, but I don't want to necessarily go that route. So I'd like to do more scenes where we kind of interact offline, have conversations, and then maybe I bring some of those conversations back in and go back to the old West End game Star Wars. In the old West End game Star Wars, you had adventure scripts that would start your adventures. If I already have the script written up, because the adventure scripts were great, except for the fact that none of the player characters ever spoke like the characters in the script, and I never had enough players to cover all the roles. So you start cobbling them together, and people would get their script and go, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't do that. And it was really meant to be like a jumping off point, a point for sort of improv, and this is the gist of your scene, do the gist of the scene. But we were younger and we looked at it and we're like, but I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't do that. You don't have that problem if it is something that the player character has already said. And you know that they've already said it because they posted it in a chat screen with you. So if you have a chat with somebody and you want to bring it back in, you can hand them the transcript of that scene and you can rerun the scene. You can tell them in advance too, if something changes here, we go canon with what happens at the table and do like 2 layers of canon. Do prep canon and then, real canon. So when it happens at the table, that's what becomes the real canon. And you go with that. But try not to deviate from it. I would tell the players, try not to deviate from it, because once you've done 2 things, it's hard to guarantee that people are going to remember the right thing as their ongoing canon. And so again, you're back to taking notes, making sure everything is noteworthy and everything. Around here, we might be able to, if we have the space, I might hook up our recording equipment and record our games so that we have a listing of it, that we can go back and listen to. But I have several players who aren't interested in posting it, and it is a lot of people at the table and a lot of equipment at the table. So I'm not certain that it's terribly feasible and justifies the amount of memory space it might take to take an entire campaign. But I am still toying with the idea, just because it'd be nice to have the documentation for it. And at heart, I'm not a big fan of note taking after the fact. I'm just not very good at it. So I usually rely on my players, and I shouldn't do as much relying on my players as I do. So I'm either going to have to break bad habits or something. But again, like I was saying, the idea of having a script that they have actually said the lines from is I think a good way to handle some of those side scenes, and then you can bring them back in, time them properly, and have them happen. Because the other thing about Glass Cannon is that these guys are professionals. I mean, beyond the fact that they get paid a lot of money to put on these podcasts, most of them seem to have some sort of like theater training or just at least in a lot of stage presence experience. So they're bringing things to the table that my players, myself, we're not really going to be able to bring to the table week after week in the exact same way. As much as I would love to be able to do consistent voices, or I mean, I do voices, but I don't do quite the number of them that I would like to do, and I don't do a lot of the other things I would like to do that have that sort of showiness to them. And I know I'm not the only one. So since that's the case, we make do with what we have. And it's okay. I mean, we're not going to be until we practice. I mean, maybe we get a lot of practice in, we do a lot of different things, we start playing with different techniques. There's a good chance that we'll be better. We may not be at the point where I want to be, where I have like this dream of being here. I may only make it to here, and that's okay. So, the other things I was thinking about for side scenes, like I said, we used to do long email scenes, and the other possibility is just you go and you meet with somebody for lunch, you have lunch with them, you do your thing on the side. You can do it that way, or you can maybe do scenes at the table. I mean, sometimes you do scenes at the table. It's hard to balance how much time you give to other people though when you do them at the table if you're doing them raw, and it's not as good that way, I don't think. So I think we're kind of, for my money, I'm looking at doing more with some prep, getting some prep in, working it that way, telling those side stories and things like that. But the kinds of side stories you can tell are varied. I mean, you could be doing dreams, you could be doing flashbacks, you could do flash forwards. Flash forwards are a lot harder because you can't be certain if somebody's going to be alive. But it is a possibility if you're doing like alternate, whatever. One of the ways that you can do it at your table, and one of the things that I was talking about with my blog today when I was talking about crowdsourcing, one of the things I wanted to bring into this discussion now is if you want to do a side scene at your table and something comes up, a lot of times things will come up because somebody will ask for, what do I know about X, Y, or Z? And one of the things that you can do, instead of just making them roll the die and giving them the information. Now, this doesn't work so well if you're doing an AP or you're working in a campaign setting that's already made, that it's a pre-published campaign setting. But if you're doing this on your own, one of the things you can do is you can say, I don't know, what do you know about this Thieves Guild? So they're doing it they're trying to figure out what they know about this Thieves Guild. And you say, and they're like, well, what kind of, all right, well, you have them make a skill check. Knowledge local. They roll the die, and they're like, I got 15 knowledge local. And you think about what it is that you want to tell them, what you think they should know, and you might say, okay, tell me 2 things you know about this Thieves Guild. And as they start to tell you the things that they told you, you might ask them, if you're doing it as a side scene, you might say, how do you know these things? Tell us about the situation that got you this information. And maybe they tell a side scene about the time that they ran into somebody from the guild, or maybe more likely it's the time that they dealt with an information broker, and he told them these things when they were in trouble because they were being chased by somebody. And if you talk to your players up front and you tell them that these things are going to happen, and you have to kind of let them know up front that it's, and then you can kind of guide them through those scenes. You can ask them questions that, So, who did you hear this from? Where were you when you heard it? And you drag that story out of them, and you can kind of work that in. They've It may not be as satisfying a narrative specifically where you've come through and you've done a side scene off to the side, but the narrative is still there, and they still did it there at the table, but they provided you with the information. Now you can decide how much of it you're going to use and how much of it you're not going to use. I do recommend, if you're going to do something like this, to let them have the reins, kind of. You want them to have as much um so, you want it to have as much of their input be factual as possible, because what we're doing is we're also selling buy-in, and we're trading off some of the responsibilities of world building to the players and letting them come up with something that interests them. And it gives you a broader base to draw from as you then expand that story and you fill it in, because as much stuff as we have in our brains, there's a bunch of stuff in your players' brains that's just as good. It's just different. And so you can use this to kind of break yourself of some of your own cliches, and you can get your players to buy into it. If your players are like, well, I was at this bar and I talked to the bartender, and the bartender was telling me that, he had run afoul of these thugs, and this is what happened, and this is what they did, and this is how they operated. And he heard from his cousin's brother's aunt that XYZ, and they fill in a detail that you can use, or maybe you really don't like it, and you're like, well, if you don't like it, you can always be like, well, his cousin's brother's aunt, you're not entirely certain if that one even sounds reasonable, because it comes so far afield. And you can kind of guide then again your players to which pieces are probably true of their story, but you want to give them up front. If you're not going to make something true, you want to give it to them up front, that that's not going to be true going forward, or that it might not be true going forward. An exception to this might be something where they tell you that the guild leader is somebody specific, and that they know for certain that this is the guild leader. Well, if for some reason you have a different guild leader in mind, you can also just say that that guild leader recently rose to power, and they're just not aware of how that's happened. Unless they're part of the Thieves Guild, there's a good chance they don't know all the machinations that are going on behind the scenes. And suddenly, if they're like, oh no, that was the guy who was in charge 2 weeks ago, this is the guy who's in charge now. As long as your players are willing to take that buy-in, they're going to feel like this is a living, breathing world where things change, where things are happening. Even when they're not on camera, there are things happening in the wings, and you want them to have that sort of feeling that there are things going on, that they're not the only people happening in the world. They're not the only people doing things in the world. Because all too often, I find, particularly with like Pathfinder and things like that, when you're playing through when we're playing through Council of Thieves, and there's a point in there, well, I don't want to use a specific example, but when you're playing through some of these adventures, you're kicking in doors in a dungeon. And a lot of times, even when your GM is really keeping it as an engaging dungeon and things are happening, you sometimes feel like those people in those rooms are only on camera because you've kicked in the door. And sometimes they'll react to other things, but you don't always feel like, if you had come into this room tomorrow, it would have been significantly different than coming into this room today. And so anything that you can do that reminds your players that it is a dynamic world, that things do change, that you can make a change in the world, but so can other people, the better off your story is going to be. Now, again, we're doing this as a side story at the table. We're going to be talking, you're asking your players questions, you're drawing things back out of them, and we're using it that way. But and so it doesn't have the same sort of pacing that other parts of your adventure may have, but it's like I said, the narrative is all still there, and I think they're going to enjoy that sense of ownership and that sense of things are going on in the world, and the fact that they happen to know something and they actually got to own the piece that they know is kind of cool. There was a Dragon magazine article way back in the day, and the title of it was something along the lines of "Nobody Knows But You." And it talked about all these really cool things you could just drop on your player characters, little bits of information about the world based on their skills. Somebody who had background, because this is back first and second ed days, somebody who had the secondary skill for like, I don't know, herbalist or whatever, they would know that this one particular plant was poisonous to trolls, or at least the trolls didn't like it, and so they would avoid this area. They would avoid them. Or maybe it was something that trolls really liked. I'm sorry, I think I have it backwards. It was a plant that trolls really liked. Point being is that you could put this plant somewhere and put some footprints down, and then people would know what was going on, or they could make certain guesses about what was going on in the environment if you seeded your world with these little bits of information. What I found over time, as much as I loved the article, I loved the premise behind it, and what I found is I would give out these little bits of information so they could do things that would basically be skill checks. My players never remembered it. I would hand out crib sheets, and it was like, I didn't give them a lot. It would be like a sheet of information. I was lucky if they read them. And it was kind of discouraging because I wanted to be able to give them this sort of information and make the world living and breathing like the article suggests. But I think the way to really at this point capture that, given the way we do things now, is to give that kind of control, seed that sort of control out of the hands of the GM, put that back over in the hands of the players, and let them say things like that. Now you might say they're doing a knowledge check, knowledge nature, and we're doing the same troll scene that I was just talking about. And you happen to know that the player character has an uncle who taught them about hunting and foraging. If they've got a ranger and they've got an uncle in their background who taught them how to be a ranger, ask them about the uncle that taught them to be a ranger and what he said about the troll berries. And you point out the berries and say, what did he say about these berries, and what do you know about, what did he tell you about this? What did, and you can give them some of that information, rather than try to hand it to them on a piece of paper. You can kind of feed it to them a little bit and then let them fill in the blanks. And maybe they fill in the blanks and they tell the other player characters. You might even say, this would be a good opportunity to share that story. Why don't you share the story of blah, 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 if that character is a talking character. If they're not a character that does a lot of talking, then, maybe that's not what you worry about. You just have them tell you about it while they're all at the table. This would be an opportunity that you can tell your players that when you do these side scenes, they can recount these stories too. Maybe if they recount them to each other, then you can have those scenes where people bond. You're having that memory in your back of your head, and instead of playing out the old side story, we just relay that side story, and we do it role-playing on the spot at the table so that all the players can be involved. So that was kind of my thing on side stories tonight. I didn't have a whole lot else prepared. Side scenes, like I said, we're going to be on Cypher Unlimited tomorrow. Hold on a second. Let's see. Michael says, I played a cleric once upon a when in the game where the DM wanted a more living, breathing world with more talking bits to cover roles. When I what? Yeah, you need to make sure you stay on the same page as your players. You set these things up. Make sure you stay on that page. Don't fall back into old habits. You don't want you don't want to get lost as the GM and as the players. Absolutely do things like that off the top of your head. Make up the prayer off the top of your head if that's what you want to do for it. That's a great way to do it. You might say, I cast bless, and then do your little prayer, or you might do your little prayer and say, that was me casting bless, just in case your DM has had a moment where they've forgotten, and kind of guide it, because that's what we all need to be doing. If we're going to be doing these things together, open communication is always the key. I mean, this is a game of talking to one another, and sometimes we just assume things and we don't actually spell them out fully. And that was one of the things I learned trying to do some of these podcast games when our sound was so bad. Some of the things that we picked up and learned and have gotten better from those early practice games, that unfortunately will never see the light of day. We learned a lot about what it takes, the extra talking that it takes to get your point across sometimes. And so those are things that we discovered, and we've been working into our games at our regular table, just filling in some of those details and talking and explaining to the other character or the other players what our characters are up to, putting everybody on the same page. You could do it with an index card. You could definitely write bless on it and hold it up. Or like I said, you could just say, that was me casting bless, and move on from there. It depends on how much of it you want to be just dramatic acting and how much of it you want to be mixing it up and doing, or you can do both. Hold it up, it says bless while you do it, so that everybody's so nobody's lost as to what exactly that you're doing, and then you can say that was me casting bless when you're finished, in case there's somebody who's playing Facebook games on their phone while you're doing the entire thing. They look up, they're like, what was all that about? So it lots of different things you can do. The buff deck is hugely helpful. I really like the buff and the condition cards. I use the buff deck quite a bit myself when we were playing our Kingmaker until it wasn't Kingmaker campaign. And Justin says, I played a bard in Rise of the Runelords, and my job is to make the other characters better at what they already do. This character died on Saturday due to double crits from a stone giant with a pick. Ooh. That's painful. And there are puns to be had there. I'm just going to pass on. I'm going to just pass on the puns. But it's hard. No idea. So, as I said, my new blog is up today. The topic of the blog was, as I said, crowdsourcing your world creation, or friends don't let GMs world build alone. And I think some of that is definitely apropos to doing side scenes, making those things happen, getting your players to buy into them, making those things happen at your table as well as away from your table. And then beyond today, again, we are going to be on Cypher Unlimited tomorrow, and I'm going to drop that right back in the chat again. Maybe. Am I? And oh, it is actually should be the Michael. That should be the newest one up on there. It's always Burst of Insight, which, if you haven't caught on, is actually where the title of our podcast for Tuesdays comes from. Monica used to write Inspire Confidence. I write Burst of Insight, and so Insights and Inspiration is where the title came from. It should be one of the most recent ones right on No Direction. It'll be the very first one under Burst of Insight today. I don't have it pulled up handy to drop it in there. Let me see if I can find it while I am sitting here doing nothing but just talking. No Direction podcast. All right. It actually looks like I'm going to get it really fast. Copy it. Come back to Twitch. Hi guys, like I never left. And boom, there we go. So that was the blog. That's where you can find it. I've got a lot of blogs, Michael. If you haven't been reading them, there's a ton of them up there. Cypher Unlimited tomorrow. That is going to be at 9:45 Eastern Daylight Time. I forget what that is in Paizo time, but it is 45 minutes later than we started tonight. So whatever that ends up being. Yeah. I think that makes it 4:45 your time. I think. No, can't be that. It can't. It's not that. That was Nick. My bad. That was Nick. That was Nick in Hawaii. I forget. My brain's not working, and I'm not doing it. Not doing it because not working. So Cypher Unlimited tomorrow. We will be back on Friday for something. We'll have everything up, and it'll be another Friday night hangout. I don't know exactly what we're going to do. I've got a couple of days to figure that out and make something good happen. So it'll be something good. I just don't know what it is yet. And then next Tuesday would be Sean K. Reynolds. So, yeah, 6:45. Yeah, 6:45 Pacific Daylight. Because my brain is just not working. I worked all day, and I was up way too late last night, and way too early this morning. Not a good combination. But if you have questions that you want to ask Sean K. Reynolds, please throw them up in our Discord, throw them up on Marlowe House on Facebook. You can throw them directly to me. You can throw them directly to Monica. We are more than happy to field any questions that you might have. Definitely go check out the event page for that, because you can throw them in the event page. That's actually a really great place to put them. Just make a new post, throw them in there. We'll see them, hopefully. And with that, I think I'm going to sign off. This has been Marlowe House Presents Insight and Inspiration. My name is Andrew Marlowe, and have a good evening. Thanks for joining us. Do I accept smoke signals? I'm going to have to respond to that one. No, I'm afraid not, because my eyesight isn't that good. I won't see smoke signals from... Now, if you can get them on the news, if you get smoke signals on the news in Seattle, I might get a chance to see them if they're on CNN, NBC, but it's probably a bad idea. Just saying. You don't probably want to be on the news for setting fires. But have a good night, all.